Hello there, this is Andreas with the international class, the cool ones. Yeah! Shout out! Was that a mice? Meow. Okay, so we're gonna extract some hair in Photoshop. And we'll be doing that using the select and mask. But first off, we need to make a selection that we'll be using select and mask on. So we'll do that using the quick selection tool. We'll make a very rough selection. So you'll just do like me, just make a very rough selection. The only place that's not supposed to be rough is actually her left shoulder and possibly her right shoulder, except that you will get some of the object in the background as part of the selection. But otherwise, the hair will be very roughly selected because it's impossible to select the hair properly using the quick selection tool. But we will do that using the select and mask option in the select menu. Okay, so this is a very rough selection. When my selection is very rough, I'll start removing areas that have blue in them. So notice that my selection runs all the way down her hairline. I don't want to go inside of her skull, it needs to go down her hairline. So don't do like this. Don't make a selection that goes inside of her head. You know, that's going to be a bad selection. So, but there is some hair floating out in thin air. I'm going to remove that by holding down Alt and just moving through that area with my mouse button clicked. So I'm going to remove blue spots. That's actually the main thing we will remove, because if there's blue in the selection, select and mask will have a hard time figuring out that it's blue that we want removed because there is blue in the selection. So we're going to try to remove as much blue as possible so it knows that the blue is actually what we don't want. It will not know that if we have too much blue in the selection. Yeah, and I can probably remove a bit of it down here by the shoulder and the hair down here. It's okay if you don't take all the small spots. You'll notice that there are some very small spots of blue inside of her hair. Just ignore that. Photoshop will take care of that. Yeah. And again, we're still just using the quick selection tool. We could be using the lasso. It doesn't matter if it's quick selection tool, it's just quicker. Yeah. Okay, so notice that I also selected the air that is in between her arm and face. So we'll just try to deselect some of that. Actually deselect all of the blue and hair around here. Can you see the selection on the screen up here? Or is it hard to see where my selection actually is? Okay, so if I click this quick mask mode, it's perhaps easier to see my selection. You see right now I moved through the left part of her skull, making sure that there's not much blue out here. That was what I was just doing. And also took a bit down here. You see that I still have some blue in here. I removed it here, and there's still some blue here. So what I need to do is make sure, oh, that's not up there. I need to make sure that this blue is not part of the selection, and this blue is not part of the selection. This is just viewing my selection in quick mask mode. That's just so it's easier for you to see my selection. I can click that off again, and I'll try to remove those blue parts that were still part of the selection. Dun, 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 dun. Yeah. And my quick selection tool, you can always change the brush size of it. When I'm gonna go through this area in between her fingers, I'm probably gonna need a smaller brush, so I'm just gonna change the brush size up here in the content menu. And I'm gonna go through her fingers right here, holding down Alt. Yes, indeed. Are you gonna watch the new Star Wars movie? Oh yeah. It's gonna be sweet. Luke Skywalker is probably gonna kick some ass. Or not. Yeah, well, you know, every time they introduce a new Jedi or an old Jedi, they always die the next movie. It happened to Obi-Wan Kenobi, it happened to Jing Wing Quang Zheng, what his name was in Star Wars 1, when facing Darth Maul. What was his name? Yeah, that's right. Okay, sounded nothing like what I said. Okay, so are you about there? So there's not much blue left. For example, like mine, you see that there's not much blue left. You don't have to use quick mask mode. That's just me showing you how my selection looks in color, right? But are you approximately around this area, this far? And it's okay that we have like a fence down by her shoulder. It's okay that it's still part of the selection. Okay, so when we're here, the next thing we'll do is go to Select, Select, and Mask. Jawline. Okay, so when we go into Select and Mask, it will probably be located, our our tool will probably be Quick Selection tool, but we'll switch it to being Refine Edge Brush. Is anything wrong? Can't you find the menu? Nothing is wrong. Everyone is cool. What? Okay. Oh, yeah, so you're using CS6? Oh, old school shit. Okay, so it's gonna be almost the same on your screen. But you won't have these different tools to select from on the left side. You will have one brush size to choose from up here, and you will have two different tools up here, which is gonna be the Refine Edge tool, Refine Brush tool, I think it's called in CS6, and the Erase Edge tool. It's gonna be an eraser and a brush you're gonna have. Okay, so on newer versions of Photoshop, of course, we will see all these different variants of tools, but the one we'll be using is the one called Refine Edge tool, which is second from the top. So you're not gonna use Quick Selection tool, you're gonna use Refine Edge tool. Okay, so when this is selected, you can choose your brush size up here, and if you're using CS6, you're automatically using this tool. It's the only tool you have in CS6 in here, except for the eraser, of course. So the size, we're going to set that to around 200 pixels. 200 pixels, that's going to make a bigger brush. And on old versions of Photoshop, you can switch between eraser and brush. In this version of Photoshop, you can just switch between plus and minus. Makes the same deal. Yeah. Okay, so next up, what we're going to do is we're going to draw with this brush down across the hairline. But we're not going to move inside of the face, because then we will delete details of her face. You can see me doing that. You know, that's bad. That's bad for her face. Unless you want her to be sick and with a hole in the face. So I'm going to click undo. Actually, I'm not going to click undo. I'm going to use instead a tool that changes what you have done to the picture. The one called minus up here, which is actually erase or restore original edge. And if you use that inside of this area, it's going to redraw what was there when I got into this menu. Okay, so the plus will start changing things if you go along the edge of the hairline, and just please don't go inside the hair, because then you'll start erasing hair inside of her skull, and yeah, just don't do that, please. Put sugar on top. And you see then you just start drawing down here and it will start actually painting hair, and that's bad. You see, it doesn't do it on my screen, so perhaps you have done something bad. Are you using the right tool? Okay, then it makes sense. You see, so I just start painting up my hair again. So what he did was that he was using presumably quick selection tool instead. Yes. And that means you start redrawing a selection, so parts of your background becomes part of your selection. And you don't want to do that. And you can see actually that by just going through this, suddenly I'll have a lot of hair, but no background. Okay, but we still have some really crappy details down here. So when I'm gonna go through this area down here, I'll need a smaller brush, because if I use a big brush, it's probably gonna look very bad when I do this. It's gonna put too much of the original background in the selection, meaning that I'll get a very gray, fuzzy area down here. So I'm gonna click undo, and I'm gonna use a smaller brush for this area, perhaps around 70 pixels. And then I'm just gonna go very gently across the area where I can see that it's getting more and more hair the more I draw on it, and just try not to get too much of the area which does not have hair, and try not to go down in her shoulder, because then she'll lose parts of her shoulder. You can always redraw it if anything goes bad. And that starts to look nice, and I'm gonna try to make it look nice over here as well. And yeah, it's yeah, it's looking awesome. If I'm allowed to compliment my own graphic. In here between the fingers, it seems like a hamster has been eating parts of her fingers. So I'm gonna make the brush even smaller, probably around 20 pixels, and I'll just go gently around the edges of her fingers, edge of the fingers, so Photoshop can start drawing some hair back in those areas. And you know, if I do anything wrong, you can always just push the restore original edge brush and then start redoing it. Just simply erase parts, actually erasing what the other tool did, so it's actually restoring to the original picture how it looked when we got in here. I think that's fine. Do you need like a few more seconds or minutes to complete this, or are you approximately the same? What do you call it? Are you at the same point as me, approximately?
I can see a difference that on your screen, like the background is completely gone, while I can see it transparently. I can see the squares, but
Yeah, the same thing. Like your background is too white.
Oh yeah. Okay, so I forgot to tell you about that there's something called view mode up here, and then there's something called transparency here. So if you have set it to onion skin, then you can choose a transparency setting of how visible do you want the background to look. I should probably have told you that first. Oh yeah. Well, if you don't want any of that messing with you in the future, you can always just switch the view to be on layers instead, and that way we don't have to think about transparency. Then it's just 100% transparent in those areas that you want transparency. Did that help?
yeah.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Cool. Okay, so next off, if we think that our selection, this is a selection, it looks like it's an extraction, but it's still just a selection. Because when I click OK, this will be shown as a selection instead of an extraction. But if you want to make the selection even better, according to how the hair looks, you can switch on Smart Radius. When you switch off or on Smart Radius, nothing happens. Unless you set another radius than 0 pixels. If it's set to 0 pixels, nothing will happen. But if you switch off the radius, you'll notice that it will start making small adjustments along the edge of the hair. And to my experience, this picture looks best actually when it's around 2 pixels, but perhaps you'll find something better if it's set to 2.5 or 1.5. Just don't put it too high, then it will start looking really bad because it will start deleting hair inside of the person and it will start eating her shoulders, and it's really not good for her. Okay, so we have some other settings down here. These rarely work well with hair. They're more used when it comes to other things than hair. For example, when we were extracting the little guy, the statue, in block number 2, that's long ago, you notice that we selected him, and then because some of the sky was still located along the pixels by his arms and shoulders and whatnot, then we went into select, modify, contract, just to remove a few pixels from the edge. In here, you could have made a selection of him and chosen select and mask, and then you would actually be contracting by shifting the edge to minus, and you would be expanding by setting it to plus. The cool thing about doing that in pictures, like for example the one of the statue, is that you would get a preview, so you can see actually how much am I removing from the edge of him. And then some of you will be like, why didn't you just tell us this in the start when we were actually talking about the statue? That's because I want you to know everything there is to know about Photoshop. So we don't learn the easy stuff first. We learn Photoshop first and how to use the different functions in Photoshop. And even though this Shift Edge function is here with a preview, I've learned that it's better to know what you're actually doing when you type in values than actually just viewing a preview screen. For me, I know what contracting 2 pixels mean. I don't need to preview it. But for some of you, you'll be happy that you'll see a preview of it. And for some pictures, it will actually be nice that you have the preview, because you can't always figure out what it's going to look like if you don't have a preview. You know, clicking OK to something and then clicking undo if it looks bad is also a way of previewing. You can always undo stuff if you... Okay, so I'm just talking a lot. Let's click OK. What I'm saying is don't shift edge. on this picture. Don't use contrast, don't use feather, don't use smooth, just click OK. And then we'll get a selection. And this selection is something we like. We like this selection. Okay, so there are several ways we can use the selection. I'm going to show all three of them, the three that we are familiar with, if we want to extract the background. Okay, so the first one is the one we learned from the start. That is actually unlocking the layer so it's no longer interpreted as a JPEG. When it's unlocked, I can click not delete now, because then this will happen. But I could select inverse, that's Shift Command I, select inverse. And of course, since all of you are on PC, oh, there's one Mac user. On PC, it would be Shift Control I. But then we can delete the background by clicking delete. But that's one way of doing it. I'm just going to sum up all of them. I'm going to inverse it again, undo it so it's no longer inversed. And instead, I could also just make a duplicate of what is inside of the selection. I'm going to do that by holding down Command, that's Control on a PC, and clicking J as JF Kennedy. And you'll notice that another layer comes out of it, and if I hide the original, the layer beneath, you'll see that you have an extraction in a new layer. Okay, so that's the second way of doing it. The third way of doing it is the way we learned yesterday, which is using a mask to do it. So in order to make my selection into a mask, an extraction mask, I'll simply have the selection active, and I'll then click Add Layer Mask, which is located at the bottom of your Layers panel, and then it will make a mask out of it. So that's three different ways of making your extraction. Naturally, the two last ones I mentioned are the best ones if you want to have the possibility of going back to your original. Some people would say that this last one, using the extraction mask, is the best one because you don't have to have an extra layer of your original, because the original is already integrated in the mask. Okay, it's really up to you what you use, but in this case I'm going to use it with mask. And so if I need to delete some more of the background, for example, down here by the fence, that's actually one of the reasons why I left the fence here. Down here by the fence, in the background, I'll need to remove that. So naturally, if you did not have a mask, you would just simply use something like the eraser tool, or you would make selections and then click delete to start removing from the background. But in this case, I'm using a mask, and when I'm using a mask, you simply color by using black or white and using a brush. So I'll use the brush tool, and if I paint with the color black, you notice that I simply start removing stuff. And that's of course because I'm located on the mask. Remember to be located on the mask, not the layer. If I'm located on the layer, then I'll simply start coloring the layer. So there's a difference. Am I located on the picture compared to am I located on the mask? The mask. Yes, and some of you will probably be thinking, why not just use selection tools? And you can use that if you want. When I'm trying to get this edge right here, it's a good idea that you switch your brush that you're painting with to a hardness of 95% approximately. It sounds very precise, 95% approximately. So it could actually be anything close to 95%. So I'm just gonna right click to choose between different brushes, and if my brush library looks a bit different than yours, it's because mine is folded out. Don't worry about that. That happens. I just do weird stuff. But I'll change the hardness to 95%, making the edge look more realistic. It looks weird if a person has like a ghosty shoulder because you're using a too low hardness value. So having a hardness value of around 95, that's gonna look more realistic. And some of you will be like, why don't you just set it to 100%? Well, then it looks like she's been cut out from a magazine. So that will be too rough. That will make too rough edges. And you know, some of you will be like, oh my God, she lost some of her shoulder. And you know, you'll just switch to painting with white. And when you paint with white, you'll start painting back her shoulder. So it's really not a big fuss if you accidentally delete something. A big fuss would be if you start doing some deleting of hair. If you start doing this, that's gonna be really hard to paint up again, because then you have to draw those tiny straws of hair. So the areas we'll just try to use white and black brush will be something like her shoulders and so on. And if we really want to go into her hair, for example right here, we have to do it. There's no coming around it. You have to do it, and it will look really bad if you just use a round brush. You know, that's you see, it doesn't look like hair at all. So what we're gonna do here, when we're gonna erase this area and make it look like hair, is that we're gonna switch to using another brush tip than a circle-shaped tip. And to do that, we'll just right-click while using our brush, and inside of this settings area, we'll just go down to the one called Legacy Brushes. We'll click it once and you'll click OK. This means that now you'll be able to scroll down inside of your brushes, and eventually you'll see that there's a folder called Legacy Brushes, and we'll open up the folder down here called Natural Brushes. Oh, if you're using CS6, you won't see anything called Legacy Brushes. Instead, you'll see actually what the brushes are called. So there'll be one called Natural Brushes. You'll select that and then you'll click Append. So that's for people using old versions of Photoshop. Yes. So in the one called Natural Brushes, we'll just choose charcoal, let's say 21 pixels. Not all of these charcoals will look nice when it comes to editing hair. So just try them out and see if they work, and if they don't, just select one of the others. I'm going to select charcoal 21 pixels. As I recall, that's going to be okay for editing hair. And when I start using this, I'll just put my opacity low. So I just gradually make the changes, and I'm just going to click a lot in different areas, and you'll see that it can actually make it look somewhat more as if it's hair. What I have been doing sometimes when I'm using my vacuum pen tablet is that I'm actually using a round tip, and then I'm setting it to paint in 1 pixel size, and then I'm just drawing each and every grain of hair manually. I can actually show you a picture where I done that. I've done that. Whoop. Yep. I think, is it this one? Yes. This is my ex-girlfriend, Anne, and yeah, well, she wasn't green in her face originally, but I was trying to make her into a troll. Yeah,
That's what you do to your ex-girlfriend.
yeah. Well, we were still, you know, a couple back then. But then she saw this picture, and then we're no longer together. But you notice this hair right here is something I've drawn with my vacuum pen tablet. This hair right here, and it actually looks more realistic than the real hair. So it's super realistic. This is drawn with a vacuum pen tablet with a size of 1 or 2 pixels. I've just drawn each and every hair, and you notice that you can make it look very, very realistic using a vacuum pen tablet.
Will you teach us?
No, this is not, you know, this is not something you teach. This is simply something you do by doing like this for a million years. You know, you
To
simply,
erase your vacuum tablet.
yeah, but I could probably recommend some, you know, some speed, some, what do you call it? Some videos that have been sped up so you can see how the process
Yeah,
is.
exactly.
I could probably give you some links at a point so you can get inspiration to how you could use your vacuum pen tablet. But this is actually more me just changing from using one color of pixel, which is white, and then choosing some that are more dark and some that are almost black, you know, and just uh, putting them perhaps at the start on different layers. So I have white on one layer, gray on another layer, and black on a third layer. So just in case that if I suddenly fuck it up, you know, because you can only go back 50 times in history, then at least they're on different layers, so you can always just edit one layer if you made something incorrectly. But this is done just with a vacuum pen tablet. So if I wanted this hair extraction to be 100% perfect, I would not be using a brush that's formed like a charcoal. I would actually go in, find a color that is the same as the hair, and then I will start painting her hair back. But that's, you know, most companies will not pay you to do that because that's an extraction that's going to take a lot of time if you're trying to paint the original hair back. So I'm just telling you, it is a possibility. I've actually sometimes drawn fake eyes, for example. If I wanted a new eye, I just drew the entire eye, a fictive eye that, and if you do it correctly, you can make it look like a photo. It's just a matter of knowing where the different pixels need to be located next to each other. It helps being an artist, you know. I paint super realistic oil paintings as well, so it helps having an understanding of how things look in reality and so on. Okay, so
Is there any to show us of your oil paintings?
I can show you. You can see some of them by the end of class if you want.
Yeah.
Yep. But of course I'll be using. I'm using an eraser now. I'm supposed to use a black brush. Bam, ba-dam, bam, bam. Just remind me by the end of class because I have a tendency of, you know, as an artist I forget stuff, you know, too much absinthe throughout my lifetime. Absinthe, I love absinthe. The Green Fairy. I'm just gonna be happy with this. Of course I could do it better, but and notice that if there's transparency inside some of the hair, some of you will probably have transparency around here. Some of this hair would probably be transparent. Just draw it back with a white brush, you know. If you accidentally delete something here, you could always draw it back with a white brush. Again, if you want to switch between your black and white, over here it's just clicking X. Okay, so I'll draw back perhaps some of her shoulder as well over here. And you know, you can use a lot of time just making sure that everything is back in place, but I'm not gonna do that. When I'm done with this, I'm just gonna say, this looks nice, I'm happy. think that her shoulders. Yeah. And with my inner perfectionist, I'm really having a hard time just accepting that it looks like this. So I'm going to try drawing some of it back. Yeah, let's just say that's fine. It's fine. It's okay, Andreas. You can live with it. You can live with it. Okay, so let's say this is cool. We're happy with this. Well, the next thing you'll do is you'll try to put it on another background just to see how it looks. So I'm making a new layer. You should do that as well. A new layer that I will put underneath the layer with her in it. And in this layer, I'll fill it with orange. And you know why I'm filling it with orange? That's because orange is complementary to blue. So that's the opposite color of blue. So it's actually the worst possible color you could put it on. And that's good because it will make all the blue pixels stand out. If you put it on blue background, then you won't be able to see where the blue pixels next by her hair edge is. So we're going to use the opposite color of what her original background is, which is orange. So I'm going to choose orange from my swatches, and then I'm just going to fill my new layer with orange. And if you don't remember how to fill a layer with color, it's simply holding down Alt and clicking backspace, like that. Alt, and you could say delete instead if you want. And this will make you think, you'll notice that, oh, this looks like an okay extraction, and then you'll start noticing that there's some green stuff on the edge of her hair. And it's not actually green, it's blue, but when you put blue together with orange, it starts looking green.
Does this function with Alt and backspace work for also Illustrator and Design, or is it also only for?
It's only for Photoshop.
Okay.
Yeah. Because Illustrator and InDesign fills color differently because they actually realize what is an object. In Photoshop, you need to make a selection for Photoshop to interpret it as an object. Yeah, so it's different in Illustrator and InDesign. In a lot of cases, it's the same keys in Photoshop, Illustrator, and InDesign. But when it comes to fill, it's different. Because, you know, in Illustrator, it's so easy to put a color in, you know. You just draw an object and then you just click which color it's supposed to be in the fill. So a lot of people are like, why isn't it that easy in Photoshop? And that's because Photoshop is not vector. You need to make a selection for Photoshop to interpret it as vector. Yeah. For Photoshop to interpret it as vector, I mean for Photoshop to interpret it as an object. Photoshop will never interpret it as vector. Okay, so in Illustrator, you know, you just click the fill and you just choose a color, boom, and that's how you do it in Illustrator. So an object, when you click on an object in Illustrator, it automatically always shows which color that object is. So when I switch between these two, it will show not foreground color, but actual filling of that object that I'm located on. So that's totally different than in Photoshop. Okay, next step of this is actually making the edges look nicer. And to do that, I will actually have to skip my mask. So at this point, I'll need to delete my mask. And some of you will be like, no, I don't want to lose my mask. Well, then make a copy, you know. And so what we're going to do is we're going to hide the original one, the layer underneath. Otherwise, when I make changes to the layer on top, I'm not going to see that there's changes because the layer underneath is showing true. So I'm going to hide the layer underneath. We don't need it, but we have it in case we do something bad. Okay, so this other picture on top, I'm going to remove the mask from this picture because I need to do something called layer matting. I think it's pronounced matting. Mating would be with one T, so this must be matting. I'm not sure, but so I'm gonna delete this mask because it prevents me from being able to use matting. So I'm gonna delete it, and then I'm gonna click apply so it applies the extraction to the layer. And yeah, actually, perhaps I could have been a bit more precise. You notice that she's actually losing hair inside of her hair. But whatever. I could use history brush tool if I wanted it. But I'm not gonna... Okay, I'm gonna do it, goddammit. Okay, now it's back. Yes, yes, you're happy. Okay, perfectionist Andreas, OCD, cannot help it. Okay, so that's fine. At least, yeah, let's pretend it's fine. Next thing, okay, so now you notice that the mask is gone. She has been reduced to just being a layer without a mask, and now we can actually go in and choose layer matting. And in here we have 3 different options. Don't think about the one called color decontaminate. You need an active selection to choose that one, but just ignore that one. We have the one called remove black matte, and that removes anything that's dark and just makes it very light. So that's not going to be the option unless you put her on a white background afterwards. Then there's the opposite, which is remove white matte. That's going to make light pixels dark. And then it looks like she has much more hair than she actually had originally, because it's making the blue pixels at the edges of the hair into dark pixels. Suddenly that means she has more hair than originally. And actually the one that I feel is the best one for this picture is probably defringe. So I'll choose defringe and I'll set it to 1 pixel. It's almost always between 1 and 2 pixels. And I'll click OK, and we'll notice that this will provide us with perhaps a better result. Though, notice though that the fringe sometimes creates some fringes along the edges. I don't know if you can see it, but there's some weird green stuff. It's trying to mix it, these original pixels, mix them up with the other stuff so it looks as if it's fading more into it. But sometimes that will actually look a bit fringed, but we can change that. We can make that go away. So the next thing I'll do is I'll use the burn tool. Burn, baby. Burn. Burn tool makes stuff darker. Dodge tool makes stuff brighter. Sponge tool makes stuff black and white. Okay, so burn tool. The cool thing about burn tool and dodge tool, for that sake, is you can choose for it just to adjust the highlights, just to adjust the midtones, or just to adjust the shadows. In this case, I wanted to adjust the tones that are bright. You notice that the tones I want adjusted are the bright ones at the edge of the hair. So let's assume that perhaps if I choose highlights, there's a chance that it will adjust the mid-tone stuff just a bit while not adjusting the dark tones at all. If I choose mid-tones, it's going to change everything, I promise you. So we don't want the mid-tones darker than they already are. So I'm going to switch to highlights. It's probably at mid-tones already, so change it to highlights. Exposure, I'm going to set that low, probably around 15%. And now if I start just painting in those areas where we have this green light color, you'll notice that it starts getting darker and darker and darker until it actually looks like it's part of the hair. And you know, if it's too slow, just switch up, just turn up the exposure. And notice that this tool is not click based, so you can just, if you just run through an area a lot of times, it will start getting darker and darker and darker. But then at some point you need to click once more and start doing it again. So it's like flow. It adjusts the picture like flow does when you're working with a brush. And so for some of you, the changes seems as if nothing much is happening, but you will see small changes if you really look close. Okay, at some point you're like, okay, I think this is cool, you know, I think this is just a lot of nothing happening. Well, then you'll just go in and select midtones, and then you'll choose a very low exposure, because you really have to be gentle with this one, and you have to try going across the edges that are not inside of the hair, because you will make everything darker when you use this. So I'm trying not to go inside of her hair, you know, just still being at the edges of the hair, and it will just make everything look as if it's more a part of her real hair. Can you see that it's starting to look just a bit better? Perhaps on your computer it looks like shit, but you see, if you look up on screen, up on the projection, you'll see that it's improving. At least I hope you think that it's improving. For me, it seems like it's improving. And in some areas, sometimes you'll notice that it starts getting a new color, because Burn Tool and Dodge Tool also adds color if you use them too much in an area. So what you'll do is you'll desaturate an area if it gets too much color. So you can use Sponge Tool to do that, and then you just use a very low flow. Be sure that the mode is set to desaturate, because if it's set to saturate, you will start coloring stuff. You'll put more color to the area. Desaturate will remove color from an area. So if I think, okay, there's too much color right here, then I can start changing it. Just so you can see what's actually happening. I'm setting the flow to 100%, and I'll start using this tool in her face. And you'll notice that she'll get a gray face. It's just to show you what this tool actually does. It makes stuff gray. But if you set it to a very low flow, let's say 10%, then you can just gradually remove color from an area if there's too much color. And I think that we're actually getting closer to something that looks nice. You know, some of these strains of hair looks a bit green. So what I'm doing by removing this color is that I'm making them look less green. I'm lessening the green because I am a screen. What? Am I a screen? I should make music. I think I should go and make a new career for myself. Singing. Andreas sings in front of class. What? Was that a question? Or comments are... Oh, yeah, follow my dreams. Yeah. Thank you. I will. You will never see me again. I'll just jump straight into it. Okay, so I think this is enough. You'll notice now that you went from having I don't know why I'm zooming out that much, but you went from having a picture. You can always switch back to the original here. Went from having a picture with background to having a picture that looks extracted. Yes, that is extracting hair in Photoshop. Let's take a 15 minutes break. See you later.